tonight we're all gathered here, regardless of our individual political beliefs. We're here because of the shared principles that building trust among our community, fostering strong social networks, and an informed citizenry is important to our country and to our community here. Our theme is building and strengthening civic friendship, which I'm sure Dr. Baker is going to talk about a little bit more. And I love that term because I don't know about you, but after all of the events this weekend, coming together in civic friendship and dialogue with friends is something that I'm absolutely craving. So when I was here, I was hiding in the other room, just collecting my thoughts before I came out, and I heard a lot of talking, I heard a lot of friendship, and I heard a lot of laughter, and I think that's something that we all need, and I hope that's something that we can carry into our conversations as we continue to go. So thank you so much for being here tonight. I want to thank the several people who were involved in putting this event together. Dr. Baker, thank you so much for putting together so much of the work and the background information and the resources. Has everyone checked out the website? If you have not, go to the website. There's an incredible amount of information on the website, including extra readings if anyone wants some homework. So please go and visit that. So thank you so much, and I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Baker.
Thank you so much for being here. Thanks, Jessamy, for that intro. I want you guys to just turn again to somebody who's at your table, everybody, and just say hello again. Ask them a little bit about their life just for a minute, okay? Just kind of have a little conversation. Let's do that. I got a text from Tracy Tackett back in March. She said, is there any way we can maybe get some people together to have some conversations and talk? I said, I don't know what you're talking about necessarily, but I'm in. So that led to this, right? We had an ad hoc group get together. We reached out to Carrie Pedraza at the United Way. It made the most sense initially to maybe see if they could help. We've been able to gather a number of sponsors. You can see all the sponsors' logos on your table there. I want to thank them personally for their support and their enthusiasm really about the project, including Cox First Media and the New Sun. They were really excited about it, and they've just gone crazy with the publication and the publicity of it. So we appreciate that. So we didn't know how many would show up. We had fewer chairs than we've got now, and that's a really good thing. Spread the word. Our next one is in 2 weeks. I'll say a little bit more about that in the end here of our session. But welcome to the session. You know, one of the things I wrote in the op-ed that was in the paper referred back to Lincoln and his inaugural address. You know, 7 or 9 states, I can't remember exactly, had already seceded from the Union. He's making this long train ride to D.C. to be inaugurated, and he's stopping in all these towns, and you know, he's just worried, is he up to the task? You know, the nation has fallen apart at the time, and he gets there, and one of the most iconic words spoken out of that speech was simply, we must not be enemies, right? We must be friends. We must try to build civic friendships. Despite what all has happened, we must try to be friends. And Aristotle talks about what he calls civic friendship. There's a Greek word for that. I'm not going to pronounce it necessarily, but he talks about civic friendships. And what he means by that is we are in it together as a community, okay? We live in a community together. We don't always agree. In fact, democracy flourishes on disagreement and being able to talk about what our challenges are. There's a very strong argument in the literature of democracy talking about disagreement. We often hear the term, or we might even say this ourselves, well, I just want to agree to disagree with you, right? That's often a way to sort of stop a conversation, you know, because it's getting a little tense. Actually, in debate, and certainly in conversations where we're trying to get around that disagreement or work through that, disagreement is where we should start, Okay, here's where we disagree. Let's talk about that. Let's see if we can understand how come we disagree, and maybe we can proceed from that. So Aristotle acknowledged that in a community, certainly in a democracy, and he wrote about democracies. He didn't think democracies were that great, actually, but he wrote about them a lot. He said we are civic friends, and we need to recognize that and understand that together we rise and fall, and when we have disagreements, if we can be able to work through those, we can probably see better times. And so that was the sort of the theme we launched and sort of landed on, certainly, and decided to launch as sort of the theme that would sort of pull everything together. I'm very appreciative of my colleagues, Dr. Julius Bailey, who's here tonight, Dr. Stacy Ryan, who will be doing the next one, and Dr. Tom Taylor, who's also agreed to be part of this and make some presentations. So here's how ideally they're going to go. We do this as professors. We're going to try to generate as much conversation as we can and discussion. We do need to make present some things, some information I think you'll find interesting to enlighten you some in terms of some of the topics that we've got. So my approach is always, let's get started, let's get the juices flowing, let's have a conversation, let's move on from there. I'll make some presentation of some material, see what you think about that, and that'll take us to 6:30, okay? So let's get started. Next slide, please. I want to talk about some additional terms that will be important as we go forward for this series. There's a common typology of political systems that we use in political science. We have a democracy in the United States, but there are other types of systems. And this is, I'm going to defer to my comparative politics specialist, but this will be helpful. So we have what we call closed autocracies, and in these systems, citizens can't choose their leaders. All right? They have very few freedoms, if any. They don't have the ability to choose leaders. China is an example of that. Electoral autocracies, citizens actually do choose leaders, but they lack any sort of freedom that really makes that choice meaningful. So Russia is an example of that right now. We have what we call electoral democracies, and this is when citizens do choose the leaders in meaningful elections. They do have some freedoms, but they don't have the panoply of freedoms that we kind of think about when we think about full democracy. Argentina right now would be an example of that. There's some less freedom of the press, for example, in Argentina than you might expect. Liberal democracies, then, are those like America, where citizens choose leaders in meaningful elections where they have information, they have the freedom to choose. They also possess a lot of other freedoms, freedom of speech, equality, freedom of the press, et cetera, et cetera. The United States is certainly a liberal democracy. I'm going to be saying a lot more about what liberal democracy means in another session when I'm back with you. So I'll leave that for now. But America is certainly a liberal democracy. Next slide, please. So this is just a map of kind of where these systems are across the globe. The red is a closed autocracy. The yellow is an electoral autocracy. The light shade blue is electoral democracy, and the dark shade blue would be the liberal democracies. And you can see the distribution there. And we're kind of a split world when it comes to the different types of systems that we've got out there. So I just wanted to display that for you to kind of give you a sense of where the different countries are that would come, that would fall into these typologies. Next slide, please. So I always like to start my classes with some trivia questions to kind of get the juices flowing, and I want us to talk together again. So question number 1, where did the word democracy come from? Go. Talk about it. See if you can. I'll give you 30 seconds or so. Julius knows. Okay. Who wants to volunteer an answer? Where did it come from? Greece. Okay, the ancient Greeks, 5th century. All right, that's where it came from. Answer, please. Ancient Greeks had a word, demokratia. Demos means the people, kratos, power, so ruled by the people. So democracy is ruled by the people of some sort, all right? Comes from the ancient Greeks, and they were the ones who had the city-states. They had really kind of the early form of democracy that we know about. Question 2. Many refer to the U.S. as a republic. What does the word republic mean in this sense? Go. Okay. Who wants to offer an answer? Yeah, John. No, not Roman. The Roman had republic. They had a republic. In this American sense, though, is kind of where I'm going, because a lot of people say, "Well, it's a republic." Well, it is, but what does it mean? It's a representative democracy. That's what it is. Answer, please. That's what a republic is. So, is a republic a democracy? Yes. It's a representative democracy where people select leaders to make decisions for the people, but who governs? The people. The people are sovereign, okay? So a republic and a democracy, those are the same things, okay? Except in a larger country, we can't have direct democracy where everybody comes to sort of, give their opinion. We have to elect representatives to do that. So that's what a republic is in this sense. Question number 3. Since 1945, what year saw the world's largest number of democracies of either kind? Remember, there were 2. And how many countries out of 179 qualified as such? 10 seconds, just kind of wild guess. Take a guess. 85? 30? 12? 85 is closer. 12 is pretty cold. Answer? The Daily Double. No. 95 of 179 countries were classified as democracies in 2016. How many democracies do we now have? Less? Yeah, fewer. 90, that's very close. Answer, please. 91. Okay. So democracy is kind of on the decline. It has been on the decline actually since 2000 in terms of the number of countries that are democracies. This is a huge research area in political science called democratic deconsolidation, how democracies are struggling around the world. And the evidence for that is that we have fewer democracies now than we did in about 10 years ago. Okay, yes, ma'am. It is. I would say it's redundant. Yeah, it's the same thing. Democratic republic, democracy, republic, representative form of government. That's what it is. Good question. All right, that's the trivia. Those are sort of the icebreakers. Let's talk about the topic for tonight, okay? The topic is this. We're going to wrestle with the question, what do you think it means to be a good citizen? What is a good citizen, okay? I want you to talk for a little bit among yourselves about what you think a good citizen is. What are the things a good citizen would do, should do? And we'll come back here in a little bit and see what you think. And then here's the interesting thing. There's some really cool research on this about what Americans think it means to be a good citizen. And I think you're going to find it pretty fascinating. But talk amongst yourselves. We'll get some reports back and see what you guys think it means to be a good citizen. Okay, let's come back together. I'd like each table, if possible, to report back at least one thing that you came up with, an answer to that question, what is a good citizen? Can we start back, all the way back here where Jessamy is? What'd you come up with? Can you report one thing? What is a good citizen? What would be a good citizen? What is required? I'm sorry? Finding common ground with others? Okay, all right. They don't always speak for themselves. Right. Right. Yeah, because of positions. Yeah. So trying to find common ground. Truth is sometimes hard to acknowledge or to find, is what you've said. Anything else from this group? How about this table? What did you guys come up with? Okay, so voting, participating in politics, at least voting. We don't have mandatory voting. I'm going to ask if we should later, but we don't have that right now. So yeah, that's something that a lot of people would say, well, you need to participate, you at least ought to vote, right? Anything else that you came up with?
Oh yeah, we came up with several things.
Okay. You want to say one more thing? Okay. Obey the rules, follow the rules. Good. Obey the law. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, good. All right, so voting, obeying the rules, trying to find common ground, working with others. Do you guys come up with something here at this table you want to add? Okay. Being open to conversations, trying to see others' points of view. Okay. And what about this table? Yeah. So being aware, being knowledgeable about the issues is something that a good citizen would do. A lot of people would say that, sure. What about this table back here? Did they? Okay. That's good to know, actually, because we're going to sort of see how this coalesces. Okay, be good to others. Yeah. Be concerned about others. Yeah, for sure. How about this table? Paying attention to local and state stuff in particular, also national, communicating with our local leaders about our concerns. For sure. How about this table?
Well, we wrote it down because we argued a little bit.
Okay. They argued a little bit, she said.
Because we started.
Yeah. So being active in the community, being involved, regardless of whether you're eligible to vote or not, is that encompass it pretty well? Yeah. How about this table? Back here. Jerry, did you come up with something?
We talked about being informed, participating,
Yeah.
and following respecting the rules.
Yeah. Following rules, being informed, participating, okay, some similar kinds of things. How about you guys?
I think the only thing wasn't mentioned is don't infringe on others' rights.
Okay, don't infringe on others' rights. Be respectful of others' rights. Okay? Good. This is fascinating. When I do this with my students, this is the stuff that they'd come up with. It's the stuff that most Americans, I think, would respond with if they were asked the question, what does it mean to be a good citizen? But interestingly enough, when we start asking citizens this specifically, and we get some rigorous research applied to this, we find that citizens in America actually don't agree on what it means to be a good citizen. And I want to tell you up front that this is sort of the takeaway for tonight, right? We are not in agreement on what it means to be a good citizen. And for me, as a political scientist, that sort of undergirds a lot of the division that we've got. Okay, if we're not agreeing on what it means to be a good citizen, we're starting off at kind of a bad place. Next slide, please. Next slide. So I want to talk about some really cool research that has been done by Russell Dalton. And Russell Dalton is a professor emeritus of political science at University of California, Irvine. He's also the founder of the Center for the Study of Democracy, which is currently located in Sofia, Bulgaria. And he is kind of retired, but has done a ton of work on the question of citizenship. And in order to, he sort of started thinking about this a long time ago, early in his career, wondering what Americans thought about it. So, of course, as any researcher would do, he went to the literature, going all the way back to the Greeks. What do the Greeks think about what it means to be a good citizen? So he went to Aristotle. And Aristotle, in his book Politics, argued that citizenship kind of balances two roles. Good citizenship balances two roles. And he said, citizens are all who share in the civic life of ruling and being ruled in turn, okay, in a democracy. So we share in ruling, but we also recognize that we need to be part of obey the rules, as many of you said, right? So in a democratic society, this implies four notions or four aspects of good citizenship, if you will. Individual freedom and autonomy to sort of do our own thing. Participation, of course, in public and civic affairs, like many of you said. The authority of the state or government or the rules by which we're governed. And then finally, the social relations with others, being kind to each other, caring for each other, many of you said, right? So those are the 4 dimensions that really come out of this. Next slide, please. So in thinking about what a good citizen is, Dalton decided to go to the data and see if he could find national surveys asking people what they thought a good citizen was. And lo and behold, sure enough, the General Social Survey asks a number of questions every year about different questions about what people think would be a good citizen, and they're asked to say how important or unimportant these things are to their idea of being a good citizen. And the scale ranges from 1 to 7, where 7 is very important, 1 is not important at all. So the question really is this. There are several questions related to each dimension. This is something that some people would say is a good citizen. How important is it to you? Is this to you? Okay? He found that there were questions related to all 4 of those dimensions that we just mentioned. Participation, being autonomous, adhering to laws, and helping others, or the solidarity dimension. Next slide, please. So in the General Social Survey, he found 3 questions that were asked related to participation. So these are the dimensions that we just mentioned on the left. The center here would be the data from the General Social Survey. There was also at the same time another survey from the Center for Democracy and Civil Society called the CDAX survey, and these are questions that were asked in that survey. So I'm just going to focus on the middle section here, which is the GSS data. For participation, they were asked, how important is it to always vote in elections? How important is it to be active in social groups? How important is it to choose products for political, social, or environmental reasons? So the respondents were rating this from 1 to 7, right? For autonomy, that dimension, they were asked, how important is it to try to understand the reason of people with other opinions? And how important is it to keep watch on actions of government? So those are the 2 questions that specifically kind of got at that dimension of autonomy. Next slide, please. For social order and obeying the rules and things like that, they were asked, how important is it to always obey laws and regulations? How important is it to never try to evade taxes? How important is it to be willing to serve in the military in a time of need? Unimportant, very important. And then on the solidarity dimension of being concerned about others, how important is it to support people in America who are worse off? How important is it to help people in the rest of the world who are worse off? So a huge national survey, bunch of respondents, over 3,000 respondents, telling us how much they think these are important or not. Next slide, please. So once he found these data, he wondered if there was something that was sort of determining how people responded to these questions. Was there some, what we call an underlying dimension that would explain why some people said this was important, but they said that was unimportant? And in order to figure that out, there's a statistical technique called factor analysis, and that's on the little glossary that's at your table. And this is a technique that simply takes a whole bunch of individual items and tries to determine if there are any underlying explanations for why those items are being responded to like they are. That's all I'm going to I don't want to get in the weeds on this, okay? So he ran factor analysis on these responses. And what he found was very interesting. First of all, he found that they started what we call loading. They were connected in a specific way. There was a specific pattern to how people were responding to these questions. You can see in the shaded boxes, or shaded cells there, those are the items that people responded to that tended to what we call load highly together. They were connected together somehow. Vote in elections, never evade taxes, serve in the military, obey the law, keep a watch on government. Okay? Those on this side, you can't see it, starts with keep a watch on government, point 4. That's too light for this projector. But keep a watch on government, active in associations, important to understand others, choose products that are important, help worse off in the world, help worse off in America. Those all loaded highly on a different dimension. Everybody with me? I hope I'm not losing you, okay? And first of all, this is fascinating, right? These people are responding in a way that suggests that they're thinking about citizenship in a couple of different ways. On the one hand, those on this side are talking about duties that you need to do, right? You got to vote. You got to pay. Don't evade taxes. Obey the law. On this side, it's more engaged-oriented, being concerned about others. And so what he has discovered here, what he discovered in 2004, was that Americans have two different dimensions of what it means to be a good citizen. And I think that's reflected in what you guys responded to, right? Some view, well, we all view both of these as important, right? We have some duties, but we also need to be engaged. No question about it. But some Americans view the duty orientation as more important than the engaged orientation. That's profound. And I'm going to show you why here in a minute. But that's what he discovered. And that's what we now know about Americans' views of what it means to be a good citizen. Next slide, please. This is the CDAX analysis, the other survey that he found at the same time, asking very similar questions. He found the same thing with a different survey. Is that good for social science knowledge to find the same thing with different data? Yeah. We're more confident in what we know if we can repeat something and find the same thing. Next slide, please. So not only did he do this with the 2004 data in his first book, but he did a revision where he looked at 2014 data 10 years later. Guess what? Found the same thing. Then he did it in 2018 with his most recent edition, the one that I use in my class, the third edition. He did it with 2018 data, found the exact same thing. So what do we know about Americans' views of what it means to be a good citizen? What do we know? They're two different perspectives, right? We all have a sense that we have some duties and we've got some obligations, but we also have to be concerned about others. We all have a sense of that. Most of us do. But some of us prioritize the duty orientation, and some of us prioritize the engaged orientation. So here's the next question for a little discussion. Who would be more likely, do you think, to be more duty-bound, and who's more likely to be engaged-oriented? Go. Yeah, in terms of different groups, right? Yeah, in terms of men versus women, young versus old. Yeah. Who tends to be higher or emphasize the duty orientation more? Here you have it. White, male, those who are more religious, those who are older, those who tend to be more conservative, Republicans, non-college educated folks, and lower income folks tend to be higher. He scored all these folks on the dimensions, right? Those who are higher on duty bound tend to be those groups. Those who are more likely to be higher on engaged tend to be minorities, non-Asian minorities, women, less religious, younger, liberals, Democrats, college educated, and higher income. I want you to remember this. This is another key takeaway. Who are those folks who are more likely to be duty-bound? Who are more likely to be engaged? Okay, because we're going to look at some implications of this, and that's really where I want to go. So does this matter? What effect does this have potentially on our politics, on what we believe, on how we engage in the political system? Kind of some interesting questions, right? Next slide. So this is from his original book, and I've got an update. And there are some copies of the slides at the table if you can't quite see. So what he did initially was he simply plotted the engaged scores against the duty-bound scores, right? So on the horizontal axis, you've got low on duty, high on duty. On the vertical, you've got low on engaged, high on engaged. And I guess I got some feedback there. And again, with the shading of this, you might want to look at your slides on the table. But you can see Republicans, for example, are here, kind of pretty high on duty, whereas the Democrats are up there, are higher on engaged, right? Less than high school education, less educated, kind of low on both, but certainly low on engaged. Women are up in that quadrant in the Northeast, whereas men are down here more. So you can see that the significant differences here across these various categories that he was able to show. Okay, questions about that? Because I have some closing questions that will sort of generate some more discussion here, but I just want to share with you this cool stuff, actually, right? Next slide. So this is from his most recent data. This is from 2018 data. And what he did here was kind of plotting engaged citizen on vertical, duty-based on the horizontal, and then kind of connecting these various groups, kind of showing the differences here. So for example, elderly, 65 and older versus younger. Whoops, that's creating too much feedback. You can see there's a pretty big difference. As you go from younger to older, you get higher on duty-based, okay? As you go from older to younger, you get higher on engaged. Look at white versus black, Democrat versus Republican, non-religious versus weekly churchgoers. I mean, it's really kind of fascinating. It illustrates what we just said about who are in these different cohorts, right? Now, again, I want to emphasize we all would argue mostly that you've got some duties and that you've got to be concerned about others. I mean, I think that's something that most of us would say. But here's the question I want you to go home with and ask yourself, which of these resonates most with me? Am I more engaged-oriented or am I more duty-oriented? Now, that's a paper my students write, okay? You don't have to write a paper about that. But I want you to think about that as we leave, and here in a little bit. Next slide, please. So how does this affect various things? How does it affect political participation? How does it affect what we think about marginalized groups? How does it affect our tolerance for people, other people? Let's look at participation. Duty-bound folks are less likely to engage in what we call non-electoral forms of participation, anything else but voting, okay? So protests, sending money, getting involved in campaigns. Duty-bound folks are less likely to do those things. They vote, but they're less likely to do non-electoral types of political activity, whereas engaged folks are much more likely to do those kinds of things. Go to rallies, engage in protests, sit-ins, give money, go to city council meetings, city commission meetings, or whatever. Next slide, please. Political tolerance of marginalized groups. This is an interesting question that's been asked for a number of years now. How tolerant are Americans of marginalized groups? And the groups that are referred to are communists, atheists, militarists. That's an odd one for me, but I think we kind of know what we're talking about. Homosexuals and racists. The question is asked, do you agree that, whatever, fill in the blank, should be allowed to speak in your community, teach in a college or university, have their books in the local library? Interestingly enough, very strong relationship between citizenship orientation and tolerance. Duty-bound folks are less tolerant of all of that. And again, remember who are in these groups, right? engaged or more tolerant of those kinds of things. Now, interestingly enough, I don't have time to do everything, obviously, but I do want you to know that all Americans, have become way more tolerant of all of those groups, except which one do you think? Racists. Racists. Communists, no, we've become more tolerant of all of them. Even militarists we're more tolerant of, interestingly enough, except for racists. We've become less tolerant of racists over time, interestingly enough. Next slide. What about our view of government? Does that matter in terms of our citizenship orientation? Yes. Duty-bound folks, those who are high on that, tend to be more supportive of government, interestingly enough. Those who are higher on engaged tend to have mixed views about government. What about support for democratic principles? We should have transparent government. We should not have judges who are partisan. We should make sure that we limit the amount of money in campaigns. Those kinds of principles, okay? There are 8 of them that were asked about. Duty-bound oriented folks tend to be less supportive of the importance of those principles, okay? How important is it to have these principles? They're less supportive of the importance of it, whereas engaged folks are more supportive. Then the second question is, well, how do you think we're doing at living up to these democratic principles in our system? The duty folks think that that democracy is living up to these principles pretty well, whereas the engaged folks, not so much. So kind of a flip there, right? Duty folks saying, yeah, these principles are not that important, not as important as the engaged folks think they are, but yeah, we're living up to them, okay? I mean, I think that's pretty fascinating to me. So that's Dalton, okay, in a nutshell. Let me pose some questions and generate a little bit more conversation before we go here in about 15 minutes. One of the really interesting examples of the division here that we see occurred in the NFL, National Football League. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Colin Kaepernick kneeled during the national anthem. Why did he do that? Yeah, he was looking at what was happening from his perspective, and things were not so good from his perspective, right, in terms of the treatment of African Americans in this country. And so his citizenship, being a good citizen to him, meant he had to do something. He had to engage somehow, right? And he did. And what happened? He's out of the NFL. I mean, but there was a lot of controversy about that, right? A lot of folks said, stop that. What are you doing? This is the national anthem, for Pete's sakes. You've got a responsibility to stand there with your helmet off, or maybe your hand on your heart or whatever. I mean, it really irritated a lot of folks. And to me, when this happened, it was obvious to me what was the root of this. There were different orientations of citizenship going on here, right? Colin Kaepernick was doing what he felt like he had to do as a good citizen. And those who were opposed to that, well, they were opposed to that because this was not what a good citizen should be doing. Their conception of good citizenship was governing what they thought about what they were observing. I would like, do you have any questions about anything we've talked about so far in a general sense? Claudia?
The previous slide.
Want to go back to the previous slide?
I disagree with it.
Disagree with the slide?
I do, because it's
This was done 3 times differently. Found the same thing. Initially done in 2004. That the latest one was 2018. So we don't have more recent data. Yeah.
because I'm just thinking that and maybe I'm
No, that seems to be a disconnect between what we've seen recently and what he found with these data. I agree that there is an interesting question that could be asked about that particular finding. Did you have a comment about that?
I was just going to say, since 2018, I think the script is completely flipped.
I'm not sure it's flipped, but I think some things have changed. I think the fundamental understanding of citizenship is still there. There are differences in terms of duty-bound versus engaged. Some of the folks might be oriented a little bit differently. That's a fair point, I think. Yeah, Falker?
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a frustration that a lot of Americans have, right? What can I do, right? It doesn't seem like voting in particular matters that much, given the amount of money that's in politics, and as you say, the candidate selection process is related to that. There's a lot of frustration, angst in the system, for sure. Yes? In these surveys, these are all different cohorts, different surveys, which is the good thing, right? These are different sets of respondents basically saying the same thing, which supports kind of what we know about this, right?
Well, or you look at it the other way, sometimes people's attitudes change.
They change. We don't have what's called a panel study, and this is kind of where what you're getting at, where we follow the same people over time and ask them the same questions. We don't have those data. And we could find something different with those individual people we follow over. Usually we have to do that for 10 years. It's very difficult to do a panel study because of that, because people drop out, et cetera, et cetera. But it could be done. It's very expensive, as you might imagine. But that's a very good point. Yeah. People are embarrassed to sing it maybe, but I think your point's well taken. And yes, the lived experience of individuals matters a lot. So we're talking about massive aggregate of data. We're using one individual to kind of illustrate this. But I take your point about the lived experience is very important to how we view our own citizenship. You had your hand up for a while. Yeah.
I just have I wonder your thoughts.
Yeah, great question. Why is it that the engaged folks are more likely to protest and be engaged in non-electoral activities versus electoral activities? Nobody's very much engaged in electoral activities. U.S. sucks when it comes to voting, okay? It just so happens that duty-bound people do it a little bit more than the engaged people do. And the difference really is that the engaged people are way more likely to do non-electoral stuff than the duty-bound folks. And that's where the difference is, okay? Yeah. Yes, ma'am. It's not that they're least likely to obey. It's how important it is to obey the law, right? That's the question that was asked. How important is it? Yeah. Right. It's less important. Yeah.
You can't have MLK if you always obey the law.
Right. You can't. Your point is you can't have MLK if you always obey the law, right? But yes. So it's not that they don't think they should obey the law. They answered that it was less important as a good citizen than some of the other things that were asked of them. It is. Yeah, your point is a good one. Yes, ma'am. That's a good nuanced explanation. Yeah. I think it's fair to say that, first of all, your nuanced interpretation of that is a good one. The question was always obey the law, right? And engaged folks would look at that and say, well, there are some things that need to change, and we probably need to engage and try to change the law. So I'm not going to say that is a 7 on a 1 to 7 scale. So there's the difference. Yes, I think it is fair to say that folks who are more inclined to want to try to have an immigration policy that is much more open and much more welcoming, I'll put it that way, are probably going to score higher on engaged. If you just look at the folks who are typically more likely to be engaged, high on engaged, that tends to be more of an orientation that they would take. Whereas the opposite would be true of the duty-bound folks, I would argue, on that specific issue. Julius?
Just real quickly, one of the things that annually,
Yeah. And I like that lived experience component of that to reemphasize what you said. And that's a great exercise for your students to sort of work through, I'm sure. Yeah.
So who drinks Bud Light? It's not duty bound, it's not engaged, because nobody drank it for a year.
Oh, Bud Light? Oh, I did. But I drank a lot of other kinds of beer too, so I didn't think it mattered to me. But that was a controversy, right, with what they did. Yeah.
I think if you're trying to interpret like a world outlook on something like that, it's important to realize that they weren't asked like, hey, here's 30 metrics, what's your favorite 10? Just rank these 10.
Right.
Something's always going
Well, they weren't ranking them. They were asked separately, how important is this? So they had a separate scale for each one of them. So it wasn't a ranking system per se, yeah. But that's an interesting question, right? Because we had that controversy with the Bud Light, and people didn't drink it for a while. Now, Anheuser-Busch tried to remarket it and rebrand it. I don't know if it's coming back or not, but anyway, it's part of the culture wars, right, that we're experiencing, certainly. Yeah, Steve?
I don't know if you're going to bring this up later, but one of the things that struck #6.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to end, and I appreciate that. Let me, if you didn't hear Stephen Brody, former professor of education at Wittenberg, if we folks who are in these different groups, let me reemphasize: we all see these things as important. We have duties, and we have importance to be engaged. Some emphasize the duties more than others. That's the main point. But yes, when we start looking at this then, those who are more duty-oriented view those who are more engaged as bad citizens sometimes, as not good citizens, and vice versa. And so that raises the central question that we're all here to kind of wrestle with. Can we bridge those divides? Can we talk to each other? Can we say, all right, we have a disagreement about this. Let's try to see if we can work through that disagreement. And that's the purpose of this whole process. Yes, dear?
Dr. Baker,
Yes, the woman in the back.
will you be that talking at some point about the things we do agree on as a place to start?
Yeah. See me in my office, okay? Yes, when I'm back with you, I will, well, actually, Dr. Bailey will also be talking about what we agree on with regard to the American dream. And then 2 weeks after that, I'll be talking about what are the values that we have. And it's going to be easy. You guys are going to come up with those pretty quickly. And so the answer is yes. Good question. You get an A, okay? Yes, ma'am.
I just think that, go for it.
Right. Well, that is exactly what Lincoln was talking about. We must not be enemies. That's what Aristotle means when he talks about civic friendships. We don't agree on everything, but we are in this together. We're in this community together, and we rise and fall as a result of our ability to kind of move beyond those differences. And that's what we're trying to get everybody to think about. How successful we can be, I don't know, but just getting together, I'm really delighted that you all came and were interested in trying to have a conversation. And we will certainly continue as we move through the series in 2 weeks. Dr. Stacy Ryan will be talking about confirmation bias and media consumption. How do we try to work through that process? In the meantime, the Clark County Board of Elections has some material over here on this table. If you are interested in learning more about how to vote, I know that they also are looking for poll workers all the time. You can contact them, so there's some information there. And at this table, one of the sources of a lot of the recommended readings is my new book, Strengthening American Democracy, and there are copies for sale there at that table if you're interested. Otherwise, go out and, yes, question? The website, yeah, it's a long one. Go to the Hagen Center, and on the menu side on the right, there will be community conversations. There's a link that'll take you to the website. Yeah, all the slides will be on the website as we develop them. These are currently on there. Stacy will have hers up about 4 or 5 days before the next session. We'll continue to add stuff. We live streamed tonight, by the way, and it'll be recorded, right, Chad, and be up on Springfield USA. Is that right? Okay. So we'll have the events. If people weren't able to come, they can watch the recording and tell everybody if you can't make it next time. It will be streamed on Facebook for the rest of the session. So. Yeah, that'd be cool. Bring somebody, especially if you're having a disagreement with them. Bring them. You know.